Of the 1,100 U-boats launched by Germany during the course of World War II, over two-thirds would be destroyed due to enemy action, more often than not, with the loss of their entire crew. A significant number would not even survive their maiden voyage, taking their young and inexperienced crews down with them, beneath the waves. But in a small and a remarkable number of cases, some captains and their crews repeatedly defied Allied attempts to sink them, surviving time and again against seemingly impossible odds. Perhaps the most famous of which was the U-333, the submarine, with 9 lives. At the outbreak of World War II, Germany only possessed 57 deployable submarines, with the focus of the Kriegsmarine at that time being the development of super battleships. But as the age of the capital ship began to fade away, under the twin threats of submarine and aerial attack, the German Navy moved quickly to adapt. Within a year, the nation had doubled the size of its submarine fleet, with the majority of the new boats being the new Type 7C model. It was amidst this chaotic phase of the conflict that during June of 1941, just such a submarine was launched at the shipyards in Emden and designated as the U-333. The man assigned to command this boat was 30-year-old Peter Kramer, a career naval officer who already had experience of commanding a Type 2 U-boat. A competent leader, Kramer was beloved by those who served under him and respected by both his peers and superiors. He would go on to achieve a high degree of success with his new command, but not without controversy. U-333 sailed for her first war patrol on 27 December 1941, crossing the Atlantic to take up position off the coast of North America. It was here that Kramer sank 2 ships, facing no response from the enemy, before turning back to head for Europe. During that return journey, the submarine encountered a 3rd ship, sailing under a Norwegian flag and zigzagging to avoid being attacked. Believing this to be a viable target, Kramer sank the unknown vessel with 2 torpedoes, only to then learn from the survivors she was the German blockade runner Spreewald. Calling for assistance from other German naval resources, Kramer and his peers were able to save roughly half of the ship's 150 crew. But upon his return to port, the submariner was court-martialed for the loss of the valuable resources held aboard the sunken ship. Keen to keep this matter from the Allies, Kramer's superiors ultimately found him not guilty and then quietly returned him to active duty. Eager to atone for his prior error, Kramer sailed out on his 2nd war patrol in U-333 on the 30th March 1942, again heading back to the Americas. Over the next 8 weeks, he cruised up and down the eastern seaboard, attacking any lone ships that he encountered. On May 6th, U-333 attacked 3 civilian ships in the course of 24 hours, sinking 2 and badly damaging a 3rd. But the following day, as the submarine was in the process of lining up on a 4th victim, it was located by a convoy escort. U-333 was then subjected to a sustained depth charge attack, which would go on to last for several hours. Taking his boat down deep to avoid the explosives, Kramer sustained substantial damage, but managed to slip away successfully. An assessment of the damage caused to the submarine deemed it prudent to end the patrol early and return to base. U-333 arrived back at La Pallice in France on 26th of May, having sunk a further British merchant ship during the return journey. The vessel and her crew having survived the first attempt on their lives, their success earning Kramer a Knight's Cross in the process. Following an uneventful 3rd patrol, in September of 1942, U-333 was ordered to join a wolf pack operating off the west coast of Africa. It was here the ship and its crew would have their worst encounter with the enemy so far, one that by rights should have ended them. On the evening of 6th October, whilst patrolling the entrance to the harbour at Freetown, U-333 was caught on the surface by a Royal Naval frigate, HMS Crocus. Lacking the time needed to dive, Kramer elected to fight it out on the surface, ordering his crew to man the deck gun. But in the exchange of fire that followed, HMS Crocus raked the entire hull of the submarine, with every weapon her crew could come to bear. A volley of gunfire devastated the sub's conning tower, killing 3 out of 5 of the men standing there, and severely wounding Kramer. As the battle continued, the submarine scored several hits on the Crocus in retaliation, before then managing to move inside her firing arc, the injured Kramer lying in the conning tower, shouting orders down into the vessel. In a final attempt to destroy the German submarine, the damaged Royal Navy vessel then attempted to ram, instead scraping right down the side of the sub, causing severe damage to her pressure hull and locking the two vessels. When this attempt failed, and with the two ships still lying aside each other, the crew of HMS Crocus played their last remaining card, carrying out a depth charge attempt, causing further damage to the submarine. When the crew of U-333 finally managed to secure their wounded commander below deck, the second officer then took charge, ordering them to dive. Severely damaged, but still able to submerge, the submarine then slipped away. Signalling back to U-boat command, they were in need of urgent assistance. Although U-333 and its crew had survived the battle with HMS Crocus, they were now in poor shape, no more so than Peter Kramer himself. The submarine captain had been struck by 8 shell splinters, the largest of which was the size of a human finger, jutting up out of his chest. The U-333 spent the next 3 days limping north, where it was then able to rendezvous with a Mark 9 submarine that was operating as a U-tanker. The tankers were equipped with a doctor and medical supplies, as a result of which Kramer was stabilised, but still in no state to run his ship. It was therefore decided that the tanker's first officer would take temporary command of U-333 and get her back to France. 10 days into this journey, the submarine was travelling up along the Spanish coast when she was sighted by the British sub HMS Graf. In a bizarre twist of fate, U-333 now found herself in the sights of one of her own sister ships. HMS Graf had started off her life as the Mark 7C submarine, U-570, launching from her shipyard mere weeks before the U-333. But whilst on her maiden voyage in August of 1941, the submarine's commander had signalled her surrender to the Allies during an aerial attack where he had panicked. Assessed by the Royal Navy and then pressed back into service as HMS Graf, the former U-boat now opened fire on U-333 with a full spread of torpedoes. Clearly refocused after their encounter with HMS Crocus, this time the sub's lookout spotted the 4 approaching torpedoes. Rapidly diving to avoid the incoming projectiles, U-333 managed to again slip away, arriving back at La Palisse 2 days later. With the damage inflicted to the submarine having been repaired, but Kramer still recovering from his injuries, U-333 set sail under a new captain in November of 1942. Werner Schwaff commanded the submarine on an uneventful 5th patrol, before returning for resupply and heading out again in the spring of 1943. On the evening of 2nd March, and 2 days out from her home port, U-333 was again caught on the surface, this time by an RAF Wellington of 182 Squadron. As the bomber hurtled in on an attack run, dazzling the submarine with her lee light, Schwaff opened the crew to open up with the AA guns. The Wellington immediately caught fire and went crashing into the sea behind the submarine, taking her entire crew with her. But as the dying bomber passed above the U-333, it unleashed 4 depth charges, 2 of which landed on the helpless submarine below it. The crew could only watch on in horror as one of the devices bounced off the deck and then landed in the sea nearby. The other, hammering into the aft superstructure where it lodged, both devices having somehow failed to activate. With trembling hands, the crew slowly removed the explosive, casting it into the sea, before then resuming their patrol, having inexplicably beaten the odds a 4th time. In March of 1943, Kramer was finally deemed fit enough for active duty and was able to rejoin his ship for a seventh, uneventful patrol. With improvements in Allied radar and air cover, it was becoming increasingly difficult to get close enough to an enemy convoy and make an attack. Kramer would discover this during an attack on a Mediterranean convoy on the evening of November 4th. Having located a swathe of Allied ships travelling between Gibraltar and Liverpool, he used a heavy fog bank to bring his submarine in close to attack. Using his radar to locate the nearest target, Kramer eased his vessel out of the fog, only to discover to his horror he was approaching an Allied destroyer. Firing a snapshot torpedo and crash diving, U-333 spent the next several hours evading multiple depth charge attacks. 2 weeks later, having now located the British convoy MKS-30, Kramer again moved into attack. But he and his crew were detected by a convoy escort, the frigate HMS X, which immediately went to ram. Unable even to fire a torpedo this time, Kramer again ordered his men to perform a crash drive. The submarine passing so close to the frigate's hull as it passed overhead, it completely detached their periscope. Battling to stop his command from flooding, and having repeatedly failed to sink any ships, Kramer could only once again limp back to his base in France. U-333 next put to sea in February of 1944, determined this time to make up for the failures of previous patrols. But as with the majority of U-boat patrols being conducted at this phase of the war, luck was not on her side. On March 21st, whilst operating close to the English coastline in order to monitor convoy departures, U-333 was spotted by an enemy aircraft. These in turn called in ships from the infamous 2nd Escort Group, an anti-submarine unit commanded by the famed Captain Johnny Walker, who would be credited with 20 U-boat kills by the war's end. Turning this way and that, U-333 desperately tried to find a way out of the sonar range of the enemy ships milling around in the waters above. And then the unthinkable happened. At a depth of 131 feet, the U-boats struck the seabed and became lodged there in the sediment. As the sounds of the enemy ships began to move away, Kramer and his men breathed a sigh of relief, only to then realise they could not free their ship. Believing any emergency drills would likely send the submarine shooting straight up to the surface into the hands of the enemy, Kramer instead sought alternative methods. Finally, after several hours of ordering his crew to redistribute the boat's weight, then run back and forth from bow to stern, he was able to free his ship, surfacing with very little oxygen left to spare, and then using up another of his vessel's 9 lives in the process. Despite the ever-present threat of anti-submarine aircraft patrolling the Bay of Biscay, the Kriegsmarine had ordered the entire U-boat fleet to sea in the aftermath of the D-Day invasion. Amongst their number was Peter Kramer and his crew, ordered to stalk and sink any ships of the invasion fleet they encountered, a task that was easier said than done. On 10th of June, as U-333 approached the Allied vessels, she was detected by an RAF Sunderland and attacked. As the submarine's gunners managed to score hits on the attacking aircraft, its bomb release mechanism jammed, and it aborted. But the following day, U-333 was detected by a further Sunderland and again attacked. Kramer's crew were able to drive off the attacking aircraft, inflicting so much damage on it that it crashed in the sea, killing its crew. But this time, the aircraft's bomb release mechanism did not fail, and U-333 suffered significant damage from the explosives it dropped before crashing. Surveying the damage, Kramer could do little more than again order a return to base, having been unable to sink any enemy ships. Whereas one of the few surviving submarine captains, he was now ordered to leave the boat to train the next generation of submarine commanders. Taking half of his crew with him, Kramer could only watch on 6 days later as his former command set off on its 12th war patrol, consumed by a feeling of utter helplessness as U-333 headed off on the latest in a series of futile missions. Already rattled by the loss of their beloved commander, the remaining crew were horrified to learn who his replacement was. Hans Faidler had managed to lose not one, but 2 previous submarines, both of which had been caught on the surface by enemy aircraft. On the 13th of June 1943, Faidler had been in command of the Type 7C sub, U-564, and had set out to cross the Bay of Biscay with 3 other boats. Attempting to drive off enemy aircraft by combining their flak cannons, U-564 was repeatedly bombed, limping back to port, where she was scrapped. Later placed in command of U-998, Faidler set off on his maiden voyage in that submarine on June of 1944, only to again encounter enemy aircraft off the coast of Bergen. Peppered with cannon fire and depth charges, the hapless Faidler returned to port, where the U-998 was then cannibalised for parts, before he was duly reassigned to U-333. 2 weeks later, the worst fears of the submarine's crew were confirmed when they again encountered their old adversary, the Royal Navy's 2nd Escort Group. Detected just west of the Scilly Isles, Faidler ordered the submarine down deep in an effort to avoid detection and to escape, only for 2 of the group's ships to arrive above him, where the frigate HMS Royal Killen fired a spread from her squid launcher. This device consisted of a system of 3 mortars and was designed to replace the existing Hedgehog launcher. U-333 was immediately sunk with all hands, the first U-boat to be lost as a result of an attack using the squid, but by no means the last. Peter Kramer would survive the conflict, heading into captivity as a member of Karl Dernitz's command staff. He would write 2 memoirs in his time as a submarine commander, before passing away at his home in Hamburg in July of 1992, at the age of 81. His colourful career, whilst far longer than most of his peers, is deeply indicative of the story of the U-boat war, a steep transition downhill from a period of unopposed and unqualified success to one of horror and inescapable failure, as what were once the wonder weapons of their day failed to evolve in line with the technology of their opponents.